The jungle breathed around him like a living thing. Sergeant John Fulcher pressed his cheek against the stock of his Springfield .03, the wood slick with humidity and his own sweat. Through the scope, he could see them, 3 Japanese officers huddled around a map table, barely visible through the dense foliage 200 yards away. It was August 1942, and Guadalcanal had become hell on earth. Fulcher had been a farm boy from Kentucky before the war, the kind who could shoot a squirrel's eye at 50 yards before he turned 12. His daddy had taught him that patience was the hunter's greatest weapon, that and knowing when to breathe. Now, in the suffocating heat of the Solomon Islands, those lessons were keeping him alive. He exhaled slowly, half a breath, and squeezed. The crack of the rifle echoed through the jungle, followed by chaos. One officer dropped, then another. The third scrambled for cover, but Fulcher had already chambered another round. 3 shots, 3 kills, in under 10 seconds. What Fulcher didn't know was that he just eliminated the entire command structure of a planned Japanese assault. That night, American forces would sleep safely in their foxholes instead of being overrun in the darkness. But no one would ever write about it. No journalists were there to record it. No photographers captured the moment. John Fulcher was about to become one of the most deadly snipers in American military history, and one of the most forgotten. Before the war, Fulcher had been nobody special. Born in 1919 in the hills of eastern Kentucky, he grew up during the Depression, when a man's ability to hunt meant the difference between eating and starving. His family couldn't afford to waste ammunition, so every shot had to count. Johnny could shoot the wings off a fly, his younger sister would later recall in an interview that no historian ever recorded. But he was quiet about it, wasn't one to brag. That quietness would define his war. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Fulcher was working at a lumber mill, barely making ends meet. He enlisted the next day, lying about a minor heart murmur that should have disqualified him. The recruiter, desperate for bodies, looked the other way. At boot camp, his shooting ability quickly caught attention. While other recruits struggled to hit targets at 100 yards, Fulcher was threading needles at 300. A sharp-eyed captain named William Whaling pulled him aside. "Son," Whaling said, "how'd you like to do something special for your country?" Fulcher shrugged. "I just want to do my part, sir." "Good," Whaling said, "because I'm forming a special unit. Scouts and snipers will be the first ones in and the last ones out." Fulcher nodded. He had no idea he'd just volunteered for a mission that would make him a legend that history forgot. Guadalcanal was unlike anything Fulcher had imagined. The jungle wasn't just terrain. It was an enemy unto itself. The heat drained a man's strength. The rain turned the ground into soup. Mosquitoes carried malaria. And everywhere, hidden in the green darkness, were Japanese soldiers who'd sworn to die rather than surrender. Whaling's scouts operated differently from regular infantry. They worked in pairs, moving ahead of American lines to gather intelligence and eliminate high-value targets. Fulcher was paired with a spotter named Tommy Chen, a Chinese-American kid from San Francisco who could read terrain like a book. "You shoot, I'll watch," Chen told him on their first mission, "and maybe keep you from getting your head blown off." They became brothers in the green hell. Their first week, they recorded 11 confirmed kills, all Japanese officers or machine gunners. The second week, 18. By the end of the month, Fulcher had become something the Japanese soldiers whispered about around their campfires. Uri, a ghost. He never took the same position twice. He never fired more than 3 shots before moving. He understood something fundamental that many snipers didn't. In the jungle, sound traveled strangely, bouncing off trees, absorbed by humidity. He could fire from one position and have the enemy search for him 200 yards away. But it was more than technique. Fulcher had developed an almost supernatural patience. He once waited 17 hours for a single shot, not moving, barely breathing, while ants crawled over his body and rain poured down in sheets. When the target finally appeared, a Japanese colonel coordinating an artillery strike, Fulcher's bullet ended him before he could speak a word into his radio. The assault never came. Dozens, maybe hundreds of American lives were saved. No one recorded it. October 1942. The Japanese were preparing a massive counteroffensive to retake Guadalcanal. Intelligence suggested they were massing forces for a coordinated assault on Henderson Field, the strategic airstrip that whoever controlled would control the Pacific. Whaling scouts were sent deep into Japanese-held territory to gather information and cause havoc. Fulcher and Chen moved like smoke through the jungle. For 3 days, they observed enemy movements, counting troops, identifying supply lines. On the 4th day, they discovered something that changed everything. A forward observation post where Japanese artillery spotters were directing fire onto American positions. The post was heavily guarded, 6 soldiers, maybe more, all within 50 yards of the spotter's position. A frontal assault would be suicide. Calling in an artillery strike would take too long and might miss. "We need to take them out," Chen whispered. "Those spotters have to go." Fulcher studied the situation through his scope. The spotters were in a crude tower built into a tall tree, maybe 40 feet up. Guards were positioned around the base. He could see 2 officers, probably artillery commanders, consulting maps at a table near the tree. "I can do it," Fulcher said, "but it's going to get loud." Chen checked his Thompson submachine gun. "Then let's make it count." What happened next became the stuff of legend among the few men who witnessed it, though no official record was ever made. Fulcher took a deep breath and fired. The first spotter dropped from the tree. He cycled the bolt, aimed, fired. The second spotter fell. Before the guards could locate his position, he'd shifted his aim and dropped both officers at the map table. Then all hell broke loose. Chen opened up with the Thompson, laying down suppressing fire while Fulcher methodically worked through the guards. Bolt action, aim, fire. Bolt action, aim, fire. Each movement was mechanical, practiced, perfect. In less than 2 minutes, the position was silent. They melted back into the jungle before reinforcements arrived, leaving behind 11 bodies and 1 destroyed artillery observation post. For the next 3 days, Japanese artillery fire on American positions was wildly inaccurate, missing by hundreds of yards. The counteroffensive, when it came, was uncoordinated and ultimately failed. Historians would later credit the American victory to superior tactics and brave infantry stands. None would mention 2 men in the jungle who'd blinded the enemy's eyes. By January 1943, Fulcher had over 90 confirmed kills, though the real number was likely much higher. He'd been on Guadalcanal for 6 months, an eternity in jungle warfare. He'd lost 20 pounds. His hands shook when he wasn't looking through a scope. At night, he dreamed in crosshairs. Tommy Chen had been killed in November, shot by a Japanese sniper while they were withdrawing from a reconnaissance mission. Fulcher had carried his body 3 miles through the jungle to bring him home. He never spoke about it, but the men who saw him emerge from the tree line, Chen slung over his shoulders, tears streaming down his mud-caked face, never forgot it. After Chen, Fulcher worked alone. He became even more effective and even more ghostly. He'd disappear into the jungle for days, returning only to report kills and resupply. The newer scouts whispered that he'd gone native, that he'd become more jungle than man. Captain Whaling knew better. He saw the exhaustion in Fulcher's eyes, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. "You've done enough, John," Whaling told him in February. "I'm putting in for your rotation home. You've earned it." Fulcher shook his head. "The boys need me, sir. There's still work to do." "The boys need you alive," Whaling said. "And if you keep this up, you won't be." "That's an order, Sergeant. You're going home." Fulcher was on Guadalcanal for 7 months. In that time, he recorded 109 confirmed kills, though those who served with him believed the real number exceeded 150. He received the Silver Star for his actions, a brief citation that mentioned extraordinary gallantry in action without providing any details. No journalists interviewed him. No photographers captured his image for the papers back home. While other heroes were being celebrated, Pilots with double-digit kills, infantry officers who led brave charges, Fulcher quietly shipped out on a transport vessel, just another tired soldier going home. Fulcher spent the rest of the war training snipers at Fort Benning, Georgia. He was good at it, patient and thorough, but he hated being away from the fight. He requested transfer to the European theater twice. Both times, he was denied. The Army had decided he was more valuable as an instructor than as a trigger puller. In June 1944, while Fulcher was teaching farm boys and factory workers how to shoot straight, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. Fulcher watched the newsreels in the base theater and felt like he was missing the most important moment of his generation. What he didn't know was that dozens of the snipers who landed in France had been trained by him. They carried his lessons into the hedgerows and forests of Europe. They saved countless American lives using techniques he'd taught them. In a very real sense, Fulcher fought in Europe through the hands of his students. But history doesn't record the teachers, only the students. When the war ended in August 1945, Sergeant John Fulcher was 32 years old, a decorated veteran with a chest full of medals and a soul full of ghosts. He returned to Kentucky, to the same small town he'd left 4 years earlier, and tried to build a normal life. It didn't work. He married a local girl named Sarah in 1946. They had 3 children. He worked at the same lumber mill where he'd worked before the war. On Sundays, they went to church. To everyone in town, John Fulcher was just another veteran trying to find his way back to normal, but he never slept through the night. His hands still shook, and he never, ever talked about the war. Daddy had nightmares, his daughter Rebecca would recall decades later. I'd hear him sometimes calling out names. Tommy. I didn't know who Tommy was until I was grown and my mama told me. She said Daddy had watched a lot of friends die, and it stayed with him. In the 1950s, when other war heroes were writing memoirs and appearing on television, Fulcher remained silent. When a local newspaper reporter asked to interview him for a Veterans Day story, he politely declined. I didn't do anything special, he said. I was just doing my job, same as everybody else. The reporter pressed, having heard rumors about Fulcher's exploits from other veterans. Fulcher's response was final. Those men I served with, the ones who didn't come home, they're the heroes. Not me. I'd appreciate it if you left it at that. The reporter did, and so did history. John Fulcher died in 1984 at the age of 65, his heart finally giving out after years of strain. His obituary in the local paper was 4 sentences long. It mentioned that he was a veteran of World War II, that he was survived by his wife and 3 children, and that he'd worked at Morrison's Lumber for 40 years. It didn't mention that he was one of the deadliest snipers in American military history. It didn't mention that he'd saved countless lives through his actions. It didn't mention that Japanese soldiers had whispered his name, or at least the legend of him, around campfires in fear. At his funeral, 3 elderly men in worn VFW jackets showed up. Men who'd served with him on Guadalcanal. They stood in the back during the service, and afterward they each saluted the flag-draped coffin. Best damn shot I ever saw, one of them murmured. Saved my life twice, said another. He was a ghost, said the third. Could disappear into the jungle like he was part of it. The Japs never knew what hit him. They shared stories for an hour after the funeral, standing in the cemetery parking lot, speaking truths that would die with them. None of them had children who cared about old war stories. None of them thought to write anything down. When they left, they took the last living memories of John Fulcher's war with them. So why don't we remember John Fulcher? Why isn't his name spoken alongside those of Audie Murphy or Alvin York? The answer is complicated, rooted in the nature of his service and the times in which he fought. First, snipers have always occupied an uncomfortable space in the American military tradition. We celebrate the brave infantrymen charging across open ground, the pilots soaring through danger, the officer leading from the front. But the sniper, the man who kills from concealment, who waits and watches and shoots unseen, has always made us uneasy. There's something about the calculated nature of sniping that doesn't fit our national mythology of warfare. Second, Fulcher's war was fought in shadows. He wasn't at Iwo Jima when the flag was raised. He wasn't in the first wave at Normandy. He fought in the jungle, where battles had no clear lines, and victories were measured in enemy officers who never made it back to their units. It's hard to make a hero out of a man whose greatest achievements were things that didn't happen, attacks that never came, artillery strikes that missed their marks, because he'd eliminated the men who would have made them possible. Third, Fulcher himself wanted to be forgotten. He never sought recognition. He never told his story. When given the opportunity to be remembered, he chose silence. And in a culture that increasingly demanded self-promotion, his modesty made him invisible. But perhaps most importantly, the military itself didn't know what to do with men like Fulcher. There was no established sniper program in World War II, no formal recognition for what these men accomplished. They were a military experiment. Improvised units created by innovative officers like Whaling who saw a need and filled it. When the war ended, the sniper program was largely disbanded. The lessons learned were forgotten, filed away in dusty reports that no one read. It would take another war, Vietnam, for the military to rediscover what men like Fulcher had proven, that a skilled sniper was worth his weight in gold. Today, if you visit Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, you can see the Sniper School, one of the most elite training programs in the U.S. military. Modern snipers are celebrated, their skills recognized as vital to contemporary warfare. They train for months, learning fieldcraft, marksmanship, and the psychology of patience. They're learning lessons that John Fulcher taught nearly 80 years ago. In Vietnam, snipers like Carlos Hathcock and Adelbert Waldron would build on the foundation that men like Fulcher had laid. Hathcock famously recorded 93 confirmed kills, becoming a legend in the process. Waldron, with 109 confirmed kills, would be recognized as one of the greatest snipers in American history, the same number that Fulcher had recorded on Guadalcanal a generation earlier, in far worse conditions. But while Hathcock and Waldron would be remembered, studied, and celebrated, Fulcher remained unknown. His service records mentioned his Silver Star but provided no context. The few official reports that mentioned him used vague language: enemy casualties inflicted and reconnaissance missions successfully completed. The men who could have told his story, the veterans who served with him, who saw his impossible shots and his quiet courage, took those stories to their graves. They'd been taught not to brag, not to glorify killing, not to turn war into entertainment. So they stayed silent, and silence is history's enemy. In 2019, a historian researching Guadalcanal operations stumbled across a mention of Whaling's Scout Sniper Unit in a declassified after-action report. Intrigued, she began digging deeper, cross-referencing casualty reports, interviewing elderly veterans, searching through dusty archives. She found mentions of a Sergeant J. Fulcher in multiple reports. Always in passing, always without detail. She tracked down his service record and found the Silver Star citation. She contacted his surviving daughter, Rebecca, now in her 70s. "I never knew," Rebecca said when the historian told her about her father's war. "He never said a word. I knew he had medals in a box in the closet, but he never explained them. I just thought he'd been a regular soldier." The historian is still researching, still trying to piece together the full story of John Fulcher and the other forgotten snipers of World War II. It's slow work. Most of the men are dead. Most of the records are vague or non-existent. Most of the story exists now only in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror that can never quite be made whole. But she persists because she believes these stories matter, not because they glorify war or celebrate killing, but because they remind us that history is made by ordinary people doing extraordinary things, often without recognition, often without thanks. John Fulcher was a farm boy from Kentucky who became one of the most effective soldiers of his generation. He saved countless lives. He helped win the most important war of the 20th century. He asked for nothing in return except the chance to go home and live a quiet life. History gave him his wish, perhaps too well, but maybe it's not too late. Maybe there's still time to remember the ghost of Guadalcanal, a quiet man from Kentucky who fought in the shadows so that others could walk in the light. Maybe we can learn from his story that heroism doesn't always wear a shiny medal, doesn't always get its name in the papers, doesn't always want to be remembered. Maybe we can honor him finally by remembering that he existed and that when his country needed him, he answered the call without hesitation and without hope of glory. That, in the end, is what makes a true hero, not the recognition, the service,